the Francis Scott Key Bridge, a Baltimore icon, a symbol of connection. On a day that began like any other, it became a scene of unimaginable horror. A cargo ship, the Dali, was making its way under the bridge. It was a routine maneuver, one the bridge had handled countless times before. But on this day, something went terribly wrong. The Dali, heavily laden with shipping containers, veered off course. It slammed into a support pillar of the bridge with a sickening crunch of metal. The impact sent shockwaves through the structure, twisting metal and sending concrete tumbling into the water below. The Justice Department didn't waste any time. They launched a full-scale investigation into the disaster. Their findings were damning. A damning indictment of negligence and a reckless disregard for safety. The lawsuit pointed fingers at the shipping company that operated the Dali, accusing them of cutting corners and prioritizing profit over human life. They alleged that the company had knowingly ignored safety regulations, pushing their ships and their crews to the breaking point. This wasn't just an accident, the lawsuit declared. It was a tragedy waiting to happen, and the evidence was overwhelming. The investigation revealed a series of failures that led to the catastrophic collision. It began with the Dali itself. The ship was poorly maintained, its safety equipment outdated and malfunctioning. The crew, overworked and undertrained, were ill-equipped to handle the situation. But the problems ran deeper than one ship or one crew. The shipping company, driven by an insatiable appetite for profit, had fostered a culture of complacency and disregard for safety protocols. Routine maintenance was skipped, warning signs ignored, and experienced crew replaced with cheaper, less qualified workers. The Dali, it turned out, wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a much larger disease, one that had been festering in the shadows for far too long. Section 4. The human cost: lives lost, dreams shattered. The human cost of the disaster was staggering. Dozens of people lost their lives that day. Some were commuters making their way home from work, their cars plunging into the water below when the bridge collapsed. Others were construction workers, repairing the aging structure when the impact sent them plummeting to their deaths. Families were torn apart, futures extinguished in an instant. The city of Baltimore was left reeling, struggling to come to terms with the magnitude of the loss. The port, a vital economic artery for the region, was shut down indefinitely, throwing countless lives into turmoil. Section 5. The price of negligence: holding the guilty accountable. The Justice Department was unequivocal in its stance. This was not an accident. It was a tragedy born of greed and negligence, a direct result of a company that had chosen profit over the safety of its workers and the public. The lawsuit demanded accountability. It sought not only financial restitution for the victims and their families, but also a complete overhaul of the shipping company's safety practices. The message was clear. The era of cutting corners and turning a blind eye to safety violations was over. The people deserved justice. The city deserved answers, and those responsible would be held accountable. Section 6. Never again: a call for change. The Dali disaster was a wake-up call, a stark reminder that safety is not a luxury, but a right. It forced a long-overdue conversation about the true cost of corporate greed and the urgent need for stricter regulations and oversight. The fight for justice was far from over. The lawsuit was just the beginning, but it represented a glimmer of hope, a sign that the voices of the victims would be heard and that those responsible would be held to account. The tragedy of the Dali was a story of negligence, of greed, and of lives needlessly lost. But it was also a story of resilience, of a community united in grief and determined to ensure that such a disaster would never happen again.